intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View, and we certainly have a lot we're going to be talking about today. First of all, we're going to get into our guest in studio, Dr. Joe Mcilhaney, as we talk about the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. I think you're going to benefit from some of the conversations we're going to have with him. Then a little bit later, we will also get into some issues in the news. Isn't it hard to believe, but it was this time last week we had the inauguration, so we're going to give you an update on some things that have happened, maybe a little bit of the pushback that's taking place and all of those issues. And since today is also the Holocaust Remembrance Day, in the very last half hour, in the second hour today, we're going to bring back Jack Wurfl talking about not so much the Holocaust. He's talked about that before, but I'm holding up our book on anti-Semitism. It turns out that Harvard has revised its anti-Semitism policy. We put this booklet out a while back because after, of course, the attack by Hamas on Israel, anti-Semitism kind of had a different flair, and some of the things happening on campus were of concern, so we'll get to that as well. But as I just mentioned a minute ago, Dr. Joe Mcilhaney, a good friend of this ministry. And by the way, if you get some of the material that we make available, let me hold up this one. This one's on sex and culture, and a lot of great material we have there from Carl Trueman, which he will be quoting from today. But if you get the one on sex education, you'll notice we have a whole section here about Joe Mcilhaney and his book, which I'll hold up, Hooked, the brain science on how casual sex affects human development. And of course, we even have a link to the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. So these are resources we want to put in your hands, because just as we're seeing some remarkable changes politically, I think we're seeing some changes in the culture as well. Joe Mcilhaney is, again, a board-certified obstetrician and gynecologist. If that name sounds familiar, you maybe remember the old days when he was on with Jim Dobson talking about the 1,250 healthcare questions women ask. And then also, of course, I mentioned his book, Hooked, the Brain Science, also one on safe sex and much more. Back in 1992, he founded what is called the Medical Institute for Sexual Health, eventually stepped away as president, and then called back once again, reminding me once again that you're never too old to be involved in ministry. So, Dr. Joe, it is great to have you in studio with us today.
Kerby, thanks for letting me be here. By the way, thanks for saying that I'm a friend of your ministry. I just love what you're doing and have for years and years and years.
Well,
we were
that
talking
is
a while
so
ago
nice.
about how long you've been doing this.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, again, we've known each other for a while. We've actually sat on boards together, and we're still pretty good friends in the midst of all the back and forth that we have. But let's go back for just a little bit, because I remember hearing you on Focus on the Family with Jim Dobson, and at that time you were talking about the healthcare questions women were asking, and you were certainly dealing with a lot. And we appreciated all that. And I know you got lots of exposure and questions in that regard. But over time, I got the sense that as you were answering these questions, a lot of them had to do with STDs and young girls getting pregnant. And you began to think, maybe I need to do more than just be an obstetrician gynecologist. Maybe I need to step out and begin to really address some of those issues. Can you tell us about that?
Well, it's weird how God works. I did write that book that was called 1,250 Healthcare Questions Women Ask. Did a revision, by the way, 10 years later, and it was 1,050 healthcare questions. Maybe we answered some.
Yeah.
But anyway, we were talking about, menopause and childbirth and adolescence and puberty and all the rest of it. But we did have a chapter there on sexually transmitted disease. And whenever we would, Dr. Dobson would play those tapes about the sexually transmitted disease, I just get flooded at my office with phone calls about this. So that was that. But the other thing was, in the midst of my practice, and my work was in fertility, we didn't have reproductive endocrinologists back then. So I was sort of the reproductive endocrinologist doctor in Austin. And we had the technology called laparoscopy come along. All of a sudden, we were able to look into a lady's abdomen and pelvis and see her fallopian tubes. And we would see the fallopian tubes just destroyed, like somebody poured glue on them. And so as we researched that, we realized it was from chlamydia. Chlamydia is a sexually transmitted germ that women and men, of course, get. But women would get it, wouldn't hurt the men, but hurt the women by destroying their fallopian tubes. And then they just couldn't get pregnant unless they could do in vitro fertilization, which at that time wouldn't even exist. So I started saying, well, nobody's telling these young people where this horrible problem's coming. And let me tell you, if you've ever known anybody with a fertility problem,
oh boy,
it just tears them up.
Yes,
it tears them up, and it tears up the husband. The whole pursuit of getting pregnant is so it just consumes them and consumes money. It's awful. I don't think people realize how devastating it can be in a couple's life. So nobody's telling these kids back in college and high school that they get this germ. Today, about 5% of all sexually active girls have it today still. It's the most commonly reported sexually transmitted germ to the CDC today. So foolish me started talking about it, started having the chance to talk to some kids about it, and then Dr. Dobson had me talk about it on his program, and so then that resulted in me getting calls to the office. I was really, really busy, a busy doctor, and so we started the Medical Institute to get the word out.
Well, again, I think I might also point out that from Austin to Washington, interesting enough, because you were in Austin, you got to know this governor, George W. Bush, and then when George W. Bush became President George W. Bush, he brought you to Washington. And as a matter of fact, last time you and I saw each other in a big event was in the Bush Library, interesting enough, that you and I both had a chance to speak at, and that provided an opportunity and a platform, which even to this day is, I think, very significant, because on the one hand, you've got Planned Parenthood getting more than $1 billion a year.
That's right.
Actually encouraging kids to be sexually involved. You got Hollywood talking about sexuality with no consequences and encouraging young people. And there was really a desire on your part, and at that time, President George W. Bush, to push back in the other direction, wasn't there?
Absolutely. By the way, you just said Planned Parenthood encouraging kids to have sex. You know, you're absolutely right. They were setting up a philosophy that says you have genitals, use them. But today they even say ignore the problem of STDs. That's just a part of life. You're going to get it. Don't worry about it.
Wow.
Well, you do need to worry about it, Kerby, because, for example, today 50,000 Americans get oropharyngeal cancer in their mouth from oral sex from human papillomavirus. So it's really a bad kind of disease to get. But yeah, you're right. So when I left practice and I started Medical Institute in 92 to get the word out, we had a set of slides that you say you used. They were terrible.
Let me jump in real quickly, because I think I have probably, and one of my colleagues, Dr. Ray Boland, probably grossed out more kids showing those slides of individuals with these sexually transmitted diseases. We need to go to a break, so I want to come back and finish the story. But that, if anybody has ever seen those slides, well, you can blame Dr. Joe Mcilhaney, because he's the one that first provided those. And it just, again, put the fear of a lot of things in the minds of some of these young people. They were just, I mean, I can remember so many times, oh, gross, I can't believe this. And so we're going to take a break, come back, and talk a little bit more about what unfolded there in Washington. But there are a lot of other things he's going to be talking about today, so you want to pay tune, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Charles Cook recently asked, are Californians nearing the tipping point? He asked that question because of the reaction from many in Southern California to how politicians handled the devastating wildfires. He begins by saying that he loves California and explains that he isn't just saying that because he's about to criticize many of the political leaders in California. He devotes many sentences to list the many positives about the state and its citizens. He then focuses on how California is badly run. He also says that this isn't just because he disagrees politically with California politicians. He explains he doesn't agree with the politics of Massachusetts, but he acknowledges that Massachusetts is pretty solidly governed. With those two disclaimers out of the way, he concentrates on what California does poorly. The state is run by people who are incompetent at the task of taxing and spending, passing and enforcing laws, representing their constituents, and dealing with emergencies. Put another way, its politicians have forgotten how to do the basics. One can get away with a great deal of ideology, wastefulness, and self-indulgence if the schools are good, the roads are smooth, the police are allowed to do their jobs, the housing is affordable, and the natural disasters are addressed swiftly and sanely. Charles Cook isn't the only person wondering if California voters are at a tipping point. Of course, it is too early to tell if a disaster in 2025 will affect an election in 2026 or 2028, but we have seen how a poor performance in a presidential debate last year changed everything in the 2024 elections. I predict that a big issue in future elections will be competence. Voters might be willing to get rid of incompetent politicians. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Dr. Joe Mcilhaney. A little bit later, I might open up the phones to give you a chance to join the conversation. But if you'd like to know more about him, of course, we have information about him. Also, the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. You can simply click on that button that says See More, scroll down, and you will see not only his bio, but it takes you to medinstitute.org. But you don't even have to remember all that because it's all linked there very easily on the website. But Dr. Joe, for just a minute, we had you in Washington, D.C., also mentioned those videos and the slides and all the things that were happening. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you came to realize there is something we can do, first of all, by emphasizing abstinence-based education, warning young people about STDs, and if the only thing they're hearing comes from speakers that maybe come in from Planned Parenthood into the classroom, or the only thing they hear is what they see on television, which seem to show that you can be promiscuous without any kind of consequences, there was a need to give an alternative, and that's exactly what you were trying to do.
Yeah, well, when I was trying to let people know what I was seeing through my laparoscope,
yes,
and what all of us infertility doctors were seeing through the laparoscope. I mean, we're talking across the whole United States. We're not just talking about my practice. How do we get people to understand that? And so that's where the idea of the slides came. And so I did these slides that showed gross pictures of genitals and internal pictures of women's fallopian tubes that were all destroyed, to let people know what doctors were seeing, because doctors generally don't want to talk about it.
Yes.
But then when I started getting so busy with this and also with my practice, I thought so I started the Medical Institute in 92, left practice in 95. My wife and I prayed a lot. Like she said, she knew we were going to have a very nonprofit. She said, "Joe, will we ever get to go out and eat again?" I said, "Maybe we will, hon." Well, Governor Bush saw there was a color picture of Mary and me on the front page of the Austin American Statesman. Local doctor leaves practice to help kids. And so I got this personal note from Governor George W. Bush. It said, "Other people probably think you're crazy. I think you're doing the most important thing you can," which led to meeting him. And they said he wants to see us, so I went and visited with him. And we met in his office, just him and me, a lot, talking about youth risk problems, not just sexual problems, but alcohol and drugs and all the rest of it. And then when he became president, Karen Hughes set me up for an appointment with him. And so President Bush and Karen Hughes and Margaret Spellings and Mary and me sat there in the Oval Office. You see it right now. It's so often with Trump in there. Yeah. It's just weird that this doctor gets to be there with the president. What happened then, and he even talked about me being his Surgeon General, and which then 9/11 happened. That wasn't going to happen because they were going to have an OB-GYN be the Surgeon General when a war is just breaking out. But anyway, that opened up the whole West Wing. To me, I'd go by and say hi to Karl Rove's secretary and stuff like that. But I don't think I really took advantage of this national exposure. I think part of it was that now we were at war.
Yes.
But still, it helped me realize that we need to get this message across to every kid, every parent in the whole country, because it really is a devastating problem, way beyond just sexually transmitted disease. We can talk about that too, Kerby, but anyway, the diseases themselves are bad enough. We've got 26 million new infections. CDC says it's 26 million new infections. On top of today, 20% of all Americans have herpes, which once they get it, they have it for life. You can't get rid of it. And then if you get married or have sex with your live-in, then you're probably going to give it to them. And it's an irritating problem because then it can be passed to your baby if you have it, and you have the baby when an outbreak happens, and it can devastate the baby. So, and I don't know if you know it, but there's now a 200% increase in the number of babies born with syphilis, congenital syphilis.
Isn't that just amazing?
Is beginning to rage. So these are real big problems, but they're problems beyond that. And the ones that I've gotten so concerned about now, I don't know if you know, Kerby, I know you know this, but over half of girls feel so depressed, they feel like they might commit suicide. 30% of them have thought about committing suicide. About 5% actually attempted. We researched that just recently, got into some CDC data, found out that the kids that have had sex are far more likely to be depressed, far more likely to be thinking suicide. The ones that haven't had sex are far less likely to have been or to be depressed or to be attempting suicide. So this whole sexual thing gets way beyond just disease. It gets into the mentality of kids, and we're letting that happen to them, Kerby.
Well, and again, some of our books that we've made available in the past and booklets are to point out that there are physical and medical concerns. You've identified another set, and that is the emotional and even spiritual concerns.
That's right.
Each one of these, of course, talk about what the sex and Bible have to do. And maybe for just a minute, we might broaden the issue because we've had a number of guests on the program here. I mentioned Carl Trueman, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, or Strange New World. More recently, we had another guest on that were all talking about how the sexual revolution began a long time ago, but it really exploded in the 1960s. And some of that, of course, is preceded by Margaret Sanger, Planned Parenthood. But you've been kind of looking at that as well, because if indeed you have a culture that focuses so much on sex and sexuality and has so many sexually transmitted diseases and has so many emotional problems because of that, that's not going to lead to human flourishing in the 21st century, is it?
Really isn't. You and I were talking before we started going that Margaret Sanger started in the teens of last century. By the 30s, she was co-opted in the black pastors to accept her approach to sexuality. She started actually sex ed clinics back in New York even years ago. Now she brought these forward so that today one of the major things that Planned Parenthood does is to teach sex ed. And what they're saying to kids today, and you can look it up, I'm not lying about this, they're just saying, well, you have genitals, so use your genitals however you want to, and it doesn't matter whether it's oral, vaginal, anal, so forth. And don't worry about the diseases. They're just a normal part of life. And like we've already talked about, they're devastating problems for people when they get infected. But more than that, the philosophy that they have been, in my opinion, pushing for years now is totally secular. Your human body is a body you can use however you want to. Carl Trueman then talks about how you can decide your body is a girl body even though you're a boy, and vice versa. And it's all in your brain, what sex you are, what you do with your body. And totally ignore the fact that, as we talked about in Genesis, God created man and woman, and he created them to procreate. He created them to be married for life. And that is the bottom line for, I think, really, really successful, flourishing lives.
Yes. Let's, if we can, then talk about, again, you've looked at it philosophically, you looked at it practically, but of course the Medical Institute, as we're going to a break, I'm going to encourage people to go to that website because it's medinstitute.org.
Yes.
You've got resources for parents, and of course you can do an STD risk assessment. You've got also a whole thing about sex education standards, which, by the way, I recommend here as well because you've actually looked at K through 12 standards for optimal sexual development. So we've got a lot of activists out here. For the concerned parents, you've got material. For the activist that says, I think it's about time to change some of the sex ed programs that are harming our students, you've got material there. So I want to take a break, but encourage people to go to the website. And when we come back, get into some of the things that you are talking about. There's also a very good video that you can watch on the sexual health epidemic, and of course all sorts of resources that you might want to take advantage of. So we're going to take a break, and I think we'll open up the phones. Maybe you have a comment or a question, 800-351-1212. But again, Dr. Joe Mcilhaney is wanting to do something that might be called the new sexual revolution. That is to really talk about that. We also have the development, which we haven't even talked about yet, of kind of a role-play game. Kids love video games. How about a video game that helps them to see the consequences of bad decisions, and then even working to really try to counteract some of the things happening through Planned Parenthood. So for those of you that are parents, I think we've got some great material for you. Any of you that work in a pregnancy resource center, I think this is a resource that you need to make sure you have linked to because it will help you in your practice. But also, if you're concerned about the fact that we are doing quite a bit of damage and harm to young people today, and you want to say, well, what can I do? Is there something I can say to the school board? Is there something I can send to somebody who actually is in a position of authority in my state legislature? We have some resources there. So during the break, you might go to medinstitute.org. We come back, we might open up the phones too, 1-800-351-1212. We have Dr. Joe Mcilhaney with us. We'll be back right after this.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, Dr. Joe Mcilhaney with us. By the way, I might just mention that if you know somebody that might benefit from this conversation, you might go to the website pointofview.net. There's a red button there that says watch or listen. You could send the video to them, or you could send the podcast to them. You can go to Facebook, find it there as well, and a variety of other places. And this might be something that would be very helpful to others. But Dr. Joe Mcilhaney in studio with us. We've been talking about some of the problems, and we can go into that in some detail. But I'd like to talk about solutions, and the solutions identify a problem. We have lots of different groups out here that are doing good work. The number of pregnancy resource centers in the country are a number, and I have spoken, my wife probably tell you probably more pregnancy resource center banquets than anybody other than maybe a Carol Everett, which we'll talk about in just a minute, or a few others. And I just love the ministry, and we have lots of listeners here that are certainly providing an alternative for life. We also have a number of organizations nationwide that are teaching about abstinence. They're also talking about risk behaviors and the rest. But I think the one thing, Dr. Mcilhaney, we seem to be missing is something that brings it all together. We have a lot of foot soldiers. We don't really have much of a network, and we don't have many leaders. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's really true, Kerby. First, is there a resource for helping us know how to really prosper in life? And you know what there is? The Bible.
Yeah, it's a Bible.
And I'm going to be real personal here. Okay, I got remarried 7 months ago. My wife, my Marianne died 6 years ago, and Suzanne and I fell in love and dated for a while, and then decided to get married. But during that time, we wanted to have sex with each other. Now, look, I'm 89 years old. She's 88, and yeah, you're laughing. And I was sort of laughing too, but just because we were old, it didn't mean we didn't want to. You know why we didn't, Kerby? We didn't because Scripture is so clear. From Genesis, when God created man and woman, and then instituted marriage, and then made that the source of procreation and children to raise the children. And all the way through Scripture, He doesn't do it to take away fun. He does it because He knows how He made us. And like I drive this Tahoe, and I have a book that says, here's how you take care of the Tahoe. And if you keep doing it that way, the Tahoe will stay healthy. And that's what God's telling us in Scriptures about sex. If we do it His way, we stay healthy. We prosper better. And so, Suzanne, I didn't. I'm sure you'll be glad to know that. I'm sure everybody else glad to know about an 89-year-old guy. But seriously, I think that what we have is we have an example there of how to live life,
right,
and avoid so much of what we're talking about. That's the positive side of it. One very practical example is that the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., that's sort of a liberal group. It's Ron Haskins.
Kind of left to center. Yeah,
Ron Haskins, Isabel Sawhill, people I knew when I was working actively in D.C., they came up with this research that showed if a kid will finish high school, get a full-time job, get married, and then have kids, only 3% of them end up in poverty. Yeah. So if we follow, that's the secular example of what God talks about in Scripture.
Very true.
If we just follow this, it solves so many of these problems.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, if people will follow that pattern, there's much less likelihood of divorce. Because what we know is kids that have had sex before they get married, when they do get married, they're more likely to divorce. They're not. And what I tell people, therefore, if you've had sex and now you get married and you start having cracks in your marriage, for goodness sakes, go get counseling. Don't just let it ride. But today, more kids are in a first live-in relationship are cohabiting than they are getting married. About 50% are cohabiting, about 40% getting married. Cohabiting relationships break up far more often.
Yes, they do.
They're far more involved with abuse than marriage relationships. Also, they do get pregnant in cohabiting relationships. They break up, then the mom has a baby. There are 20 million kids today with just a mother in the home and without a dad that helps them develop as a boy or a girl. I mean, the way this whole sexual thing has gone, we're ending up with people not even getting married, but then getting married and divorcing, and it's ending up producing poverty, undereducation, all the problems that we worry about in this country today, really.
Let me just mention, too, some of you might say, he just said that in passing about the Brookings Institute. I did a commentary on that, so you can get all the documentation for it. And, of course, we have a booklet on sex education, one on sex and culture, but also one on cohabitation, because, again, as you well know, not only does that affect the individuals before they get married, the divorce rate almost seems to be increasing by another 50% by those who cohabit. So exactly right. We can understand why the Bible is a good manual for life, even for those people that don't necessarily believe that it's God's word. Right. They just recognize that maybe it's the wisdom of the ages, but it has certainly been found tried and true. So I want to get to your solutions. And one of those which so intrigued me is lots of times young people will like to play games. They like to be on their phone. They like to be on their computer. And you said, well, I'm not necessarily looking to try to entertain them, but there are these role play games. And you came up with the idea, and this cost millions of dollars, I might mention, to come up with something where they can role play and see the consequences vicariously of certain kinds of actions. Can you go through that?
I really can, Kirby. You know, I don't know about you, Kirby. I'm not a marketing guy. Okay, and this is miraculous to me, but a big marketing company called JDA actually came down to find out for me through some contacts we mutually had about this STD epidemic. So the owner and the now president of the organization came and spent a day. They said, isn't anybody doing anything about this? And we said, we've been trying. Well, we didn't even know what market. I didn't even know what a marketer was, Kirby. But they went back home up to Indianapolis. And now that we've been working closely with them, they turned this issue over to their creative department, who took off and did a retreat to figure out what they could do to help try to confront this problem. And they came back with this idea of an interactive movie, which would go on social media. Kids could look at it on YouTube and TikTok. You don't know whether to talk about that anymore, and Instagram and so forth. And so they spent a year doing a movie. They made it so that a kid can go on their social media and play with it and choose to go on upstairs and have sex or get a disease, and we don't show any pornography, by the way, or make a choice to not go upstairs and to go home, or to go do the drugs or not do the drugs. It's a game. A kid, well, you and I could play it too for 2 or 3 hours if you go through all the links on it just to make all the choices. It's powerful because it shows a kid, if they get involved with sex, this can happen to you. And yet they can do that last week, and then they're at a party this week and a guy invites them upstairs and they say, I did that in that game last week. I'm not about to do that with you. So it helps them make a choice before they get involved in the event that can hurt them.
Which brings me to your book, and that is, I've learned a great deal from this book, and I highly recommend it. You can see I've got multiple. I've got the original autograph, and these are the latest paperback ones, which I think we've mentioned there as well, called Hooked. And that is, you have to understand the brain, and for a young boy especially, their prefrontal cortex isn't that well developed. The example I always use is we will never actually let a boy under the age of 25 rent a car, a young man, because
people don't believe that.
And so there are all sorts of implications. But the brain science shows us that you have to almost role play through them before, because they aren't necessarily making good decisions. And so whether we're talking about sex or whether we're talking about drugs, somebody's going to pass around a pill, you're going to take it, or just all sorts of other activities, there's a sense in which what you're trying to do is short circuit the natural instinct that a young person would have. And this role play really is a way to help them see the consequences that oftentimes their young brains don't see.
That's exactly right. Matter of fact, what we show in the book, and I hope people read it because it really is a profoundly important book in my opinion, but it shows that any experience imprints on the brain. So when we have these experiences, and you can have it like in this interactive video we put together, and it can imprint on your brain in a healthy way because it can sort of warn you so that you don't do that later on, because your brain cells actually change in response. It's pretty amazing that happens with us. By the way, sexual involvement is a major imprinter on the brain. It produces dopamine. It causes imprint on the brain, which is probably that's right. It's probably why divorce happens more often with people that have had sex in the past.
Yeah, and pornography and things like that. We need to take a break, but when we come back, let me just finish up with some other points. But it occurs to me that, again, this is another book that I would highly recommend for people that are dealing with the issue of sexuality. And if you're running a pregnancy resource center, maybe you want to pass this on to somebody who is a city council member or a school board member. Again, just another resource, all from the Medical Institute for Sexuality, Sexual Health. We'll talk about that right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just give you a couple of resources. Of course, we've talked about one, and that, of course, is the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. That would be a great way to contact Joe Mcilhaney. Some of you right now, maybe you're involved in abstinence education. Maybe you're involved in a pregnancy resource center. Maybe you're just a parent or a grandparent and concerned about your children and grandchildren, and you'd like some resources. I would encourage you to go to that website. Maybe you could even have Dr. Joe come and speak. But if you've grabbed something to write with, let me give you some other resources. First of all, another website is themoment.org, which is actually giving you the information about the video game. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about that as well. But if you go there, you're going to see a section on sex and life. You're going to see a section also about resources, because you might be dealing not with sex, but you may be dealing with suicide. You may be dealing with a number of other issues related to that. So again, there's places where it gives you support to the suicide prevention and various groups, as well as drug testing. It even gives you links to the Medical Institute, CDC, NIH, and all the rest. So that is themoment.org. But maybe you say, okay, I'd like to see the video. It's themoment.video. Right. And so again, themoment.video,
themoment.org. Not in Google. They have to put it at the top of the screen where it's TTPS.
Yeah, so there is a way to find those. Maybe we can get Karen to add those a little bit later for you. But again, most of those you can find by simply going to medinstitute.org. Maybe you can use the links there. But also, I would think there would be an opportunity, Dr. Joe, to have some people maybe having come and speak to this issue, because this is a resource that you have. There are some great books, but sometimes people want to maybe do what they can in their community to turn this around. And you have the resources and the area of expertise to make that happen, don't you?
We're doing our best, Kerby. Let me just say this one thing. I feel that we have got to get together, all of us that believe this, that what Scripture says about sex, or just what science says about sex, is the best thing. We have started what's called the New Sexual Revolution Coalition.
Right.
And please contact us. We have about 200 members of that. We do a First Friday call. I'd love for anybody that's really wants to be involved in this to join us in this coalition. Past that, I picture a lot of us, hundreds and thousands of us, getting together and even maybe pushing against this whole philosophy that is opposed to what we believe and what we know is unhealthy. So we'll see what happens as time goes by. But we did do this video for kids. We hope it impacts them. We hope it goes viral with their social media and impacts millions of them.
Well, and again, that could be something right now. Say you're a mom or grandma and you want to maybe pass this on to your children, grandchildren, and you say, okay, I'm going to send to them this link, themoment.video, and say, why don't you look at that? And so they get involved and they click on it a few times, and, an hour goes by and they've been playing the whole game, and it's caused them to maybe rethink some of the decisions they've made. Because you know as well as I do, Joe, that oftentimes individuals they make a bad decision, and then to deal with it, they make a series of bad decisions, and they sort of feel like all of a sudden, I want to do a U-turn because I'm going down the wrong road, but I see a sign that says no U-turn, and they can't kind of get themselves out of that. And we all probably have children or grandchildren that have found themselves in a difficult situation. I think that's just another way to begin to deal with that.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
The reason I told the personal example about me and Suzanne is that I want to be an example to my kids and grandkids and my friends about the best way to live, the best way to have a successful life without a lot of baggage that you're dragging along. It's the best way to go, Kerby.
And again, I think one of the things that you have pointed out in all of your books, and I've got your Safe Sex book and your Hooked book and even Girls Uncovered, is that this is doing great harm. And especially since you have the one about girls, the victims that are harmed the most are the women, aren't they? And so I think it's worth mentioning that as well, because there is this pressure that oftentimes are on girls to be sexually involved, and later there's the pressure on the girls to get an abortion. And it seems to me that especially we should want to protect them from any kind of predators, because they suffer the most from STDs, don't they?
They do. But there's one other aspect of that too, Kerby. Mark Regnerus is a researcher at the University of Texas. And he's done the research that showed that most kids, maybe not your good kids in your church that have great parents, but most kids feel, and this is not just girls but boys also, feel like there's a script that they have to follow.
Yes.
To be a normal girl or a normal boy, they have to have sex by the time they finish high school. If not by the time they finish high school, certainly by the time they finish college, that they must do that to be normal. And so this means that a girl a freshman in college, a guy comes on and hits on her, she feels like, well, she has to have sex because that's just what you do to be normal. And here she is in college now. I hate to say it like this, but we've almost made our girls feel like they have to have sex. Mm-hmm. And what guy that hits on a girl that is then willing to have sex doesn't go ahead and have sex with her? And so this whole environment that we've set up in this society is just destroying, in my opinion, really destroying so many kids today.
It's incredible. So again, if people would like to get some of your books, resources, and other things, we've given them a couple of links. But if you have other resources that they would like, or maybe they have some questions, is there a way that they can contact you by email or by phone to get in some of that information as well?
Sure. It's just Mcilhaney at medinstitute.org.
And again, we've got a video there for you to watch. Mm-hmm. We have a whole section there, which I might just mention real quickly because we talked about this in this booklet, sex education standards. Maybe you say, I'm about ready as a political activist to say it's one thing to kind of deal with it here and there, but maybe we need to have a new set of standards. And of course, we do have a link that we mentioned here, the K through 12 standards for optimal sexual development. Right. And you developed that about 4 years ago. And that is a model that you can develop in the schools and in the legislatures, isn't it?
It is. As a matter of fact, it was used here to establish the new sex ed standards that the Texas Department of Education set. But also, Kerby, those are good guidelines for a mom and a dad to know at what age to talk to their kids about sex. They're just, and not enough parents are getting them. I think parents all over the country ought to have them.
Well, then to get those as well. Yeah. Because they always want to know when to have the talk, as young as possible, right? Because if the kids come to you and ask about sexual issues, then if they have other issues, they will ask you as well. But if you avoid the question or use euphemisms and things like that, then they probably say, well, my parents don't know what they're talking about, and they won't come to you. So I think that's a good point as well. Well, always, the hour goes very quickly, but Joe Mcilhaney, if nothing else, you're a testimony to the fact that when you get to be age 65, you don't have to give up. You're on your way to being 90 and doing still quite well, and it means a lot that you came in studio today, and I hope that people take advantage of this. Couple very quick resources. One, medinstitute.org. It's on the website. In just a minute, we'll see if we can post the other ones. themoment.video, which is a video that you might want to send on to a young person. In fact, you might want to look at it yourself. And then themoment.org. So we have all those resources available at the website, pointofview.net. Joe Mcilhaney, always great to be with you, and thank you for being with us today.
Love you, Kerby. Thanks for what you're doing.
When we come back, we had an inauguration last week, and we have a few things about some of these executive orders. We talked about some of them last week, but we haven't gotten to a few of those. I think Rich Lowry, not necessarily a Trump fan, says, well, but this is what democracy looks like. And then we're going to get into a couple of other issues. Next hour, we'll also, by the end of the program, talk a little bit about this issue of anti-Semitism, because it is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we wanted to acknowledge that as well. We have a lot more to cover. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
The Bible tells us not to worry, and yet there is a lot of worrying stuff in our world today. Thankfully, the Bible doesn't stop at telling us not to worry. God gives us a next step. He says we need to pray. But sometimes even knowing what to pray can be difficult, and that is why Point of View has relaunched our Pray for America movement, a series of weekly emails to guide you in prayer for our nation. Each week you'll receive a brief update about a current issue affecting Americans, along with a written prayer that you can easily share with others. We'll also include a short free resource for you in each email so you can learn more about the issue at hand. Will you commit to pray for America? Go to pointofview.net, click on the Pray for America banner at the top of the page to subscribe. Again, that's pointofview.net. Click on the Pray for America banner. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in America. Point of View will continue after this.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you. It's a blessing. Been listening to you for several years. Your program has helped my family see current events and elections and politics through the eyes and the principles of Scripture. And that's been enlightening, and we're trying to pass that on to others.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kerby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
Hey, great show. Love all your comments and what you're talking about.
Thanks again for what you do.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, let's get back into some of the issues in the news. It is hard to believe, but it was just this time last week that we had a new president of the United States. And as we've warned you before, or prepared you for, however you want to look at that, he wanted to hit the ground running and has indeed done so. We have, of course, now confirmations for the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of Homeland Security and a variety of others. I think very quickly we're going to have the Secretary of Treasury and a variety of others confirmed. We'll see how those unfold over the next couple of weeks. But I think we are starting to see that indeed what was predicted and what was promised is coming to fruition, which is why I decided to pull this particular article. It is our first, I guess it's actually our second article by Rich Lowry, and that is, "This is what democracy looks like." Now, Rich Lowry isn't necessarily pro-Trump in a lot of ways. As a matter of fact, if you read through, by the time you get to about the second page, you can see some of the concerns he has with, of course, the personality of Donald Trump and even some of his actions. But he, I think, is writing this to maybe some of the Democrats who, as he said, were campaigning against Donald Trump as a threat to democracy, and that in some respects, while they were campaigning against him and saying that he was a threat to democracy, he was, and this is Rich Lowry saying it, no fan necessarily of Donald Trump, was building a Democratic mandate to govern. He says the hallmark of President Trump's initial days back in office have been that he's been doing exactly what he said he would do. You've heard the old phrase, promises made, promises kept. And his cabinet picks, and again, Rich Lowry has to put this in here, his cabinet picks, for better or sometimes worse, because you can see he probably doesn't like all of them, reflect the kind of people who are around him in the campaign, and his priorities have, by and large, been the ones he campaigned on clearly and consistently. You're going to hear over the next couple of weeks people starting to take a shot on the president, and again, that is the case. I'll get to you a little bit later. A pretty contentious interview between CBS's Margaret Brennan and the Vice President J.D. Vance. She's allowed to ask tough questions. Frankly, she's allowed, since it's her program, to ask even unfair questions. But he's also right to come back and criticize her or maybe format the question. And the point is that if somebody says, "This caught me off guard," well, you weren't paying attention. We said this years ago when Barack Obama was elected. People were saying, "I didn't know Barack Obama was going to do that." And I said, you have to go back to the website and some of the campaign promises to know that's exactly what Barack Obama said he was going to do. You shouldn't be surprised. Okay, I think it's fair to say that I voted for, somebody might say, Joe Biden, but I didn't know he was going to be so radical in some of his statements. But even on this program, we pointed out that he had sort of made his peace with a variety of people like Bernie Sanders and AOC, and so we expected some of this, more so with Donald Trump, and that is the case. So again, Rich Lowry says, look, by and large, the priorities he campaigned on are the ones that he indeed has implemented. One of the examples that he uses is this. No one can say they are surprised that Trump has dealt a hammer blow to DEI, moved quickly to secure the border, and begin large-scale deportations, even rolling back some of the green energy mandates or pardoning the January 6 rioters, among other things. DEI, a good example, and I think even on our Friday weekend edition, might have actually given Jeff Mateer a little better understanding of how significant those DEI rollbacks were. He all of a sudden, I could see the light go on saying, wait a minute, that's going to even affect some of the individuals we've been defending in the court. Yes, Jeff, this is more significant than I think even the mainstream media understands. Large-scale deportations, well, that's going to be a hot topic. It'll be a future topic for sure for those of you that receive our Outlook magazine. But again, one of the things Rich Lowry does is go back to some of the criticism of Donald Trump that came from Democrats and from opponents, because he said one of the accusations against Trump in his campaign was that he pledged to be a dictator beginning on day one. Even Rich Lowry said, now come on, this was always a witless smear. Trump joked about not being a dictator except on day one, referring to his planned barrage of executive orders. How many did we have on Monday? I think 200. I forgot, the count's gotten out of hand now. And then on, here we are, day 1 through 6, and he hasn't established a dictatorship. He has issued a lot of executive orders, and I posted, of course, the piece by George Will on Friday that went into that in some detail. And he says that on the other side of the ledger, again, Rich Lowry, thank you for being honest. Democrats displayed, he says, a contempt for the voters and the democratic process because, first of all, the conspiracy to try to reelect Joe Biden after attempting to hide his marked decline from the public, and then having a small group of elite aides try to call the shots, get Joe Biden to step down, swap him out for Kamala Harris, was a wholly, again, Rich Lowry says, undemocratic in spirit. And, of course, by the first debate, we saw what was taking place. Now, he goes on to give some of the criticism. He talks about Trump's method of operation, mode of operation, however you want to say it, are troubling, and sometimes he over-personalizes the view of government and maybe isn't always appreciative of all of the constraints of the constitutional system. Points out that that's why we have checks and balances, why we have a Senate and a variety of others, and then goes on to be critical of Trump for trying to save TikTok by rewriting the TikTok ban. So you can go into the rest of that, in which, of course, as you might imagine, he was critical of some of the actions already by Donald Trump. But the point he's making is a really good point. This is what democracy looks like. I would hope that this would be a pattern for future candidates, whoever they might be, Republican or Democrat, saying, this is what I'm going to do, and then to go out and to do it. And there's been, unfortunately, too many people in the past, you could probably come to kind of have various individuals come to mind, who said one thing and did quite another. And I think it is clear that if you're going to represent Donald Trump as a threat to democracy, you can't say that he didn't tell you he was going to do these things. Whether you like what he did or not is, of course, another conversation, which we'll talk about after the break. But he did tell you on many of these things that he was going to do that, and there's really no surprise. What's so interesting is oftentimes, instead of taking seriously what he posted on the various campaign website, Democrats tried to deflect that by pointing out some of the things that were on the Heritage website and saying this is what he was going to do. There was an overlap, but there were some things on the Heritage website that Donald Trump did not and was not going to do. You certainly, if you spent any time at all looking at the website of Kamala Harris and the website of Donald Trump, have a pretty good idea what those first 100 days would look like. And I think, to be fair, that's what Donald Trump said he was going to do. And so far, over these last now almost 7 days, that's what he's done. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Charles Cook recently asked, are Californians nearing the tipping point? He asked that question because of the reaction from many in Southern California to how politicians handled the devastating wildfires. He begins by saying that he loves California and explains that he isn't just saying that because he's about to criticize many of the political leaders in California. He devotes many sentences to list the many positives about the state and its citizens. He then focuses on how California is badly run. He also says that this isn't just because he disagrees politically with California politicians. He explains he doesn't agree with the politics of Massachusetts, but he acknowledges that Massachusetts is pretty solidly governed. With those two disclaimers out of the way, he concentrates on what California does poorly. The state is run by people who are incompetent at the task of taxing and spending, passing and enforcing laws, representing their constituents, and dealing with emergencies. Put another way, its politicians have forgotten how to do the basics. One can get away with a great deal of ideology, wastefulness, and self-indulgence if the schools are good, the roads are smooth, the police are allowed to do their jobs, the housing is affordable, and the natural disasters are addressed swiftly and sanely. Charles Cook isn't the only person wondering if California voters are at a tipping point. Of course, it is too early to tell if a disaster in 2025 will affect an election in 2026 or 2028. But we have seen how a poor performance in a presidential debate last year changed everything in the 2024 elections. I predict that a big issue in future elections will be competence. Voters might be willing to get rid of incompetent politicians. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. Viewpoints.info/anti-Semitism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's talk about executive orders for just a minute. Trying to get an accurate number on how many executive orders have been signed is a bit difficult. I've gone out to a couple different websites, and I'm sure before the dust finally settles, we'll have an accurate number, and I think it would probably be fair to say that this president has signed more executive orders than anybody else in the short amount of time. I have seen some comparisons to the number of executive orders signed throughout their presidency, and Donald Trump, again, probably fewer than some of the other individuals, but nevertheless, you've heard us already talk about the fact that executive orders are supposed to be kind of internal documents, not necessarily policy initiatives. This was started a little bit by Bill Clinton, but really accentuated under Barack Obama and has continued since that time. And I think there is a real problem. But let me talk about a couple of executive orders. And the first one, which we posted here, and it's actually our first article, about the number of federal workers who are really upset about this executive order. Matt Vespa puts it this way: it's a circus, but it's so much fun to watch. Not long after being sworn as the 47th President of the United States, Donald Trump signed an executive order. Are you ready for this? Mandating all federal workers return to office. He says the reactions are gold. Some are considering quitting over being forced to come into the office. If you start looking at social media, I don't recommend it for the faint-hearted, but if you do, you will see complaints about some of these federal workers saying, I'm concerned about child care, how am I going to do daycare, and all the rest. And Matt Vespa, picking a reference to a film, Welcome to the Party, Pal, because he asks, don't you think working families don't go through the same hurdles? And he's very concerned that some of these individuals that have been there for so long and were able to work from home because of the pandemic, and I always thought some of that was really sort of wrong-headed, nevertheless is the case. One EPA appointment says we're already done with version 2.0. Trump, within hours of returning to power, issued a slew of executive orders seeking to overhaul how the federal government operates, from removing job protections to ending remote work to implementing a hiring freeze. The reception inside the federal government has been uneasy. There's a better word for that, but we'll use the easy one. But especially worrisome for some employees was the decision to eliminate some of these other programs. And of course, we can get into that in some detail. But you can imagine, even in your own company, if you have been used to, for quite a number of years, working from home, all of a sudden being told that you have to go back to work and actually go to the office, the difficulty with all of that. And I will not betray a confidence, but I've had some experts in this studio who have worked with people in the federal government that have told me incredible stories about the fact that they've come into one of these particular areas in the federal government, and every time they've come in, they've met a guy at this one desk, and they say, every time I've been here, nobody's over in that other desk. And he says, yeah, that's whatever, Joe, and gosh, we haven't seen him in a long time, and we don't know if he's still working here or not. And you can't imagine that happening at a place like Amazon or Federal Express or anything like that. One individual told me about, there was an individual that claimed that actually he was working undercover with the CIA. I think he was in Homeland Security or something like that. And so that was a justification for him traveling and running up such expenses. And it turned out he was not working for the CIA. He was just wanting to use the freedom that the government has provided to him to actually travel around the world. So do we mean that all federal workers are that? No, of course not. But I think it is interesting that when sometimes they say, if you're an essential worker, you need to come back to work, even on a snow day, or even when we have not passed an increase in the debt limit, and there's a fuss about them. You can say, okay, maybe those are ones that Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency might want to think about encouraging them to seek employment elsewhere. The issue of executive orders came up this weekend at CBS. As I said before, CBS's Margaret Brennan, she can ask any question she wants. It's her program. And when she's asking of the vice president, he also can respond as he wants to. I think some of these were unfair, but you'd be the judge. I thought of bringing in the audio, but since they cross-talk across each other, I think it would be simpler for me to explain that Margaret Brennan started out part of her questioning with this. You campaigned on lowering prices for consumers. We've seen all these executive orders. Which one lowers prices? Okay, that's maybe not the fairest question, but we'll leave it as it is. So, J.D. Vance, Vice President, said, well, first of all, we've done a lot. There's been a number of executive orders that have caused already jobs to start coming back into our country, which is a core part of lowering prices. You know, again, bringing jobs back, having more jobs, that's going to be helpful. And he talked about the fact that we then have more capital investment, more job creation. This is going to empower consumers to be able to afford what they need. So then Margaret Brennan pops off with, so grocery prices aren't going to come down, which I think was a little unfair. And then J.D. Vance says, well, no, Margaret, prices are going to come down, but it's going to take a bit of time. Then he reminds her, the president has only been president for 5 days. I think that in those 5 days, he's accomplished more than Joe Biden did in 4 years. Okay, a bit of hyperbole. It's been an incredible breakneck pace of activity. But he said, okay, you specifically ask what executive order is going to bring and lower prices down. And he says all the stuff that we've done on energy to explore more energy reserves, to develop more energy resources in the United States. Goes on to say that one of the main drivers of increased prices under the Biden administration is that we had a massive increase in energy prices. Donald Trump has already taken multiple executive actions that are going to lower energy prices, and I do believe that means consumers are going to see lower prices at the pump, at the grocery store, but it's going to take a bit of time. I think that was a very reasonable answer. How would I answer it? Well, I'd point out the fact that energy is the basis because food is going to be expensive. Why? Because it takes more expense of energy to grow the crop, to plant the crop, to harvest the crop, to transport the crop, to manufacture that, and then to distribute it to the grocery stores. So all the way through, the price of energy shows up in the price of groceries. There's one example. Also, of course, the price of energy lower at the pump. That's going to be helpful. I mean, you can begin to think that through. Now, one thing he can't say is one of the reasons inflation went up is because the Federal Reserve had to create more money. And you have more money and the same number of goods. That's called what? Inflation. I think he could say we're going to do all we can to make sure that we try to balance a budget so that we don't have to print more money. But nevertheless, that is, I think, a reasonable answer to that, I think, question at CBS. We'll each day try to cover a couple other executive orders, but I think you can get the idea, and I'm going to see the pushback going back and forth all the way. Let me also mention that there is another resource here that we wanted to make available to you, and it's a piece by Katie Pavlich, and that is, it's entitled, Yes, Debanking is Real. Last week we talked about the World Economic Forum. Interesting enough, Donald Trump spoke, and at one point in the midst of his presentation, he said, I hope you start opening your bank to conservatives because many conservatives complain that the banks are not allowing them to do business with the bank. They don't take conservative business. Of course, you've had, the Bank of America CEO Brian Moynihan was there, and we have all sorts of examples in this article. I have provided to you a number of commentaries that go into this, and of course, the reaction, of course, as Bank of America says, we have more than 70 million clients. We welcome conservatives. But then you have all sorts of quotes that Katie Pavlich has pulled together. One from Eric Prince, another one from, interestingly enough, the individual who was at Silicon Valley, and that's Mark Andreessen. We've talked about this in previous commentaries, and so this is another kind of 4-page article to remind us that, yes, we've had the problem of debanking, not just in England, not just in France, not just in Germany, but here in the United States. And I think Donald Trump knows something about it because I talked just a week ago and have documented it in one of my commentaries that Melania Trump talks about it in her latest book. So if you are maybe wanting to get some facts and figures about this phenomenon of debanking, that's another article we've posted for you on the website at pointofview.net. We come back, we're going to talk about debanking and anti-Semitism right after this.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let me just mention we're going to be talking about anti-Semitism. This booklet that I'm holding up, for those of you watching online, on anti-Semitism is available free of charge. We had it come out before, especially after the attack on October 7th and the impact that has had on not only our culture, but even on college campuses, which we'll be talking about in just a minute. It is Holocaust Remembrance Day, and certainly that is another reason to talk about this issue. Jack Wurfl has been with us before. He was born back in 1932 in Germany to his Jewish mother and Catholic father. Lived in Austria till about 1936, but anticipating Hitler's invasion of Austria, his parents sent Jack and his brother Peter back to Germany to live with their Jewish grandparents in Berlin. As the persecution of Jews intensified, Jack's grandfather was able to sneak the boys into hiding in a children's summer camp in a resort. And so there, Jack and Peter lived for 12 years, surviving bombing raids and SS police surveillance and all sorts of things. Their mother died in Auschwitz. Father, a political prisoner, eventually died after his liberation. Eventually, though, there was an opportunity for Jack and his brother to come to the United States. And as a result, Jack took night classes to learn English, found a job in an insurance company after serving 2 years in the U.S. Army, got involved in a number of other activities, founded Diversified Insurance Industries, which was really one of the most successful, and has been with us before to certainly talk about his own experience, but also we're going to talk about one of these revised anti-Semitism policies at the institution of Harvard University. So, Jack, welcome back to Point of View.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you maybe remind us, I'm sure I left a little bit out of your story, but I think it's a really great story, and I think it's, if nothing else, an opportunity for people to begin to think about how important this day is, Holocaust Remembrance Day, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Can you maybe share a little bit more? What did I leave out? I'm sure I left something out here.
Well, no, you did a pretty good job. You did pretty well.
Okay.
It's just that I lost my entire family, but you mentioned my mother and my father and so on. But my grandparents, my uncles, my aunts, we lost everybody except my brother and I stayed alive. Yeah.
What a sad story. Anyway, we do have a link to your website in case people would ever like to hear your story, have you come and speak. But one of the things I thought we might address is we don't have a Holocaust taking place in America, but we have seen a number of young people marching in the streets to actually support Hamas, and in many cases have been even willing to attack Jewish students, prevent Jewish students sometimes to going to class. And then when we've had some of the presidents of some of these institutions, and I'm thinking Harvard, MIT, University of Pennsylvania, certainly the ones that many people have focused on, we've seen a level of anti-Semitism. Can you speak to that issue? Because you have certainly probably seen that even more so than many of us have.
Yeah, that was amazingly disappointing to myself, and I'm sure to others, to other Jewish people. It's hard to believe that someone like Harvard University could not understand the proper definition of anti-Semitism. And well, they now changed their mind because the head of Harvard University went to Congress and had nothing good to say about the Jews and what happened there. So the person who ran Harvard University was asked to leave the school, and Harvard University now has changed their definition of anti-Semitism. So hopefully people will understand it a little better.
You know, anti-Semitism was a phrase that was first coined back in the 19th century, in which at that time they were noticing the hostility towards the prejudice against Jewish people. But, of course, the anti-Jewish mentality goes all the way back much earlier than that as well. And, of course, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance uses a definition for anti-Semitism, which calls for a number of things, but it would involve calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology. It includes making, these are some of their words, mendacious, anti- or dehumanizing or demonizing stereotypical allegations about Jews. And it does seem to me that that is something that needs to happen not just at Harvard University, but other places. And it is still amazing to me when we look at this, Jack, that if you were to say some of the same kinds of things that are being allowed to be said about Jewish students, if you were to say that about Muslim students, about black students, even about women that are on campus, those would be denounced immediately. But there seems to still be kind of a pass on allowing individuals to make pretty outrageous statements sometimes about Jewish people. Is that what you see?
Yeah, I do see that. And, you know, to me, that's a big puzzle because ever since I was a little boy, I always asked, what is the definition? What does anti-Semitism really mean? I mean, the Jewish people that I knew were very fine people, very nice people. They were very productive people. They were very intelligent people. They were teachers. They were doctors. They were everything, you know, that they did such a wonderful job everywhere. And in addition to that, in most countries in which they lived. And it was just a total puzzle to me that this could happen in October 1983, October the 7th. Was absolutely amazing. And what was even as much amazing to me was the fact that someone like would run a university like Harvard University, one of the finest in the world, that person who ran that school, when he was asked to come before Congress and talk about what was happening between the war between Israel and Hamas, he could not really talk about anti-Semitism. He did not sympathize with the Jewish people at all. So now, finally, I guess they did change the definition, their definition, Harvardian definition of anti-Semitism.
Let me just mention, too, we're going to take a break and come back and talk about it a little bit more. Nearly every survey, and we talk about this in our booklet, that has been taken the last few years has shown a growing problem with anti-Semitism. So even before October 7th and what happened, of course, now 18 months in round numbers or 15 months since that time, we've seen an increase, but that was going on for some time. And I've pointed out before that if you were to look at how many times there are speakers, oftentimes even in the Democratic Party, although they've had people in their own Democratic Party that have sometimes made some pretty unbelievable and outrageous comments, but even with various individuals, Republicans or Democrats, but a lot of them have been Democratic leaders, cite the fact that there's been a rise of hate crimes. They never mention the fact that the rise in hate crimes have been the rise in anti-Semitism, because nearly half of all of the anti-Semitic incidents that are listed as hate crimes make up, or I should say almost half of the hate crimes are actually anti-Semitic incidents. And the number of anti-Semitic incidents on campus now in the last year plus have jumped significantly as well. And if you think about this just from a statistical point of view, there are probably at best 18 million Jewish people in the world. And in round numbers, about 6 million plus in the United States, about 6 million in Israel. It's not exact, but and about 6 million in the diaspora. Or put another way, the Jewish population in America, 1.8%. Just less than 2% of the population are Jewish, and yet almost all of the most egregious examples, seemingly, have been anti-Semitic incidents. Even the hate crimes that are sometimes listed, some of those are even fake hate crimes. And so you're recognizing that the real issue of hate crimes in America today is anti-Semitism. Let's take a break, though. We'll continue our conversation with Jack Wurfl, and we'll continue that right after these important messages.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Jack Wurfl. I might just mention again, it was about this time last year that Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard University, stepped down. And we now, of course, have a much more significant statement from Harvard University. They say, quote, "We are resolute in our efforts to confront anti-Semitism and will continue to implement robust steps to maintain a welcoming, open, and safe campus environment where every student student feels a sense of belonging. Today's settlement reflects our dedication to this mission. Again, this is an attempt to certainly have a broader definition of anti-Semitism. You, of course, have a couple of things going on. First of all, you have Harvard University now willing to settle 2 lawsuits having to do with anti-Semitism. One which was calling Harvard a bastion of rampant anti-Jewish hatred and harassment. And then you have the Brandeis Center and Jewish Americans for Fairness in Education also agreeing to settle the Title VI litigation. So there also were some litigations involved with that. As we've said before, sometimes if people don't see the light, they feel the heat. So, Jack, I wanted to come to you for another minute or two because it does seem to me that this provides a model. Okay, Harvard didn't get it right, and I'm willing to say that was a mistake. Claudine Gay wasn't very good in trying to understand the needs and the concerns of Jewish people, and in particular Jewish students. But I think now what Harvard has put together provides maybe a model for other universities to follow. What do you think?
Well, let's hope so. I hope so. I think there are 1 or 2 other universities where their heads were asked to leave because of this.
Yeah, MIT and Penn, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And let's hope that it will help, that this, I just don't understand why these universities and even public schools, why don't we teach in this country our students in our schools, why don't we teach them what this was all about?
And
what happened during the Third World War? What happened to the 6-7 million Jews that were killed in a short period of time, 1945 to 1939. I mean, it's a very short period of time to kill 7 million people. And it's just unbelievable to me, that this could even happen. And I just hope that this is not by any way happen again. And that's when I wrote my little book, My 2 Lives.
Yes.
I'm trying to point out certain facts in that book that today this could happen again. And these Harvard University is a classic example of what I'm talking about, I was talking about this before I even knew what Harvard University was doing.
Right.
But this is exactly what I had in mind, There is no education to our students and to our universities that teaches the most important part of our history of mankind. Where else in those few years have people killed 7 million people? Now, why aren't people being taught this in those schools? That's what I'd like to know.
Let me just mention that we do have a link to your book because I think some people, if they were not with us the last time we did the interview, we do have a link to My 2 Lives. And again, one of the things that we also have is a link to your website in which you talk about we really have a disappearing generation. One of my guests that was in studio before this actually is at a Jewish center, and he said each year they used to actually do a program on the Holocaust with some of the survivors, but all the survivors of the Holocaust that were in the Jewish center where he is located, they're all gone and they've all died. And so we really are losing an entire generation. And if we don't say always remember, we're going to have it happen again, aren't we?
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm afraid of. Yeah. And that's the point I'm trying to make by my book and by these interviews that we are having with you.
And again, I might just mention in your piece, which again I would encourage people to go to, section Many Americans Know Little About the Holocaust, a survey done by Pew Research found that indeed even asking adults whether or not they know about the Holocaust. Fewer than half could really answer some basic kind of multiple choice questions about the Holocaust. So on this day of Holocaust Remembrance, I certainly wanted to spend some time talking about that. And if you find yourself saying, well, how can I maybe celebrate this? How can I maybe educate my children and grandchildren? We do have a link to your book, My Two Lives, in which it tells an incredible story. You can get it in hardback or Kindle. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore. We've made it very easy for you to find. Also, you can go to the link that we have for Jack, which again gives you some videos and some other resources. And it does seem to me that we maybe can lament that some of these individuals are not being taught about this in the public school system. Well, we can certainly do what we can to educate our children and grandchildren, and that's why we wanted to have you on today. So, Jack, thank you for your incredible testimony. Thank you for coming on again to talk about this new revised anti-Semitism policy at Harvard. We pray and work that maybe that will be generated some enthusiasm and maybe become a model for what other universities need to do. So thank you for joining us today on this very important day.
Thank you so much for making a point of all of this and letting me talk to you on the phone about this. I appreciate it very much.
Let me just mention before we go that in our booklet on the issue of anti-Semitism, I, of course, talk about the growing problem of anti-Semitism. And I'll, of course, even remind you that if you go to the book of Esther, you know that there was a desire by Haman to actually destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai throughout the whole kingdom. And, of course, you know the rest of that story. We also know that after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the exile of Jews, AD 70, some Christians oftentimes, I think, wrongly misunderstood that the Jews are responsible for the death of Jesus. You have everything from the blood libel to all sorts of other ideas being presented. And so this is an attempt to try to answer some of those questions and to remind us that if anything, we as Christians really want to stand with Jewish people, and any kind of persecution for any reason is inappropriate. And so that's one of the reasons why during this Holocaust Remembrance Day, we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that as well. Let me, just before I say goodbye for Monday, recognize that my commentary today is called Tipping Point, and it's asking a question. With all the fires there in California, are Californians nearing the tipping point? Of course, you have President Trump going out there as well. And so, again, you can read the commentary. It's a piece that reminds us of some of the comments made by Charles Cook related to that as well. But most importantly, I hope that you'll take the time to find some of the resources we've posted today. I would certainly recommend any of the resources from Joe Mcilhaney and the Medical Institute for Sexual Health. We, of course, also mentioned Jack Wurfl's book, which again is available, and some of the commentaries dealing with some of these executive orders. And at the very end, I also mentioned real quickly some good documentation about how debanking has been taking place. And even President Trump raised it when he talked to those at the World Economic Forum. As always, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. Visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.